From this writing mess to a neat and tidy organized digital writing project, let's get into it. Are you struggling to keep everything from your fantasy project organized and together without having to go through all kinds of scribbles, notes, notebooks, like I was? And did you happen to win the Scrivener discount coupon in the National Novel Writing Month or in any other writing event? That's wonderful. Congratulations. I bet you now wonder how you can actually use Scrivener in the best way for your fantasy project. I have the solution for you. In this video, I will teach you how to turn that unorganized mess into this neat and tiny digital writing project in which you can find everything in seconds. My name is Ilse. I am a magic-wielding dragon companion and creator of worlds, and I'm here to help you on your author journey. Today, we'll look at how Scrivener can help you keep everything of your fantasy project neatly organized and tied together in one program. Let's dive into it. Before we dive into the world of Scrivener, let me give you a brief history of how I kept track of my writing things in the past. When I started writing my own stories, I kept my world details, storylines, and character information in a notebook. Better, I kept it in a stack of notebooks, stacks of notes, any note really, the backside of my grocery list, printing papers I had at hand, envelopes, you name it, I probably used it to jot down my ideas. To be honest, back then I didn't have my phone yet, so granted, these tiny notebooks were very handy. They could easily fit in my pockets, and that would give me the possibility to jot down my notes whenever I got an idea. But in the end, I had loads of notebooks filled with information that was all over the place. Looking for some specific information that I knew or remembered from somewhere, I had written down somewhere or researched and jotted down the notes. It took me ages to find that information. And when ideas changed, I was scratching out the old ideas, adding in new ideas, and I couldn't remove those other pages because, well, on the other side there was information, or on the below page there was other information. So I just couldn't rip out the page. I had to keep it. So I was in a jam. At some point I started putting everything down in Word and Google Docs, but that turned out not to be as easy either. I still had the notes scattered on my hard drive, or I had a huge document that I had to search through. So at one point I thought, you know what, enough is enough. Luckily, I had just finished the National Novel Writing Month, and I had tried Scrivener that month. To top it, I had won the event, which meant I could buy Scrivener with a 50% discount at that time. I did, and I never looked back anymore. But why Scrivener? I can hear you ask. There are so many other tools out there. I hear you, and I've looked into different programs. I've used Word, Google Docs, OpenOffice to try to write my stories. I've also tested World Anvil and Campfire, but in the end, none of them really had what I was looking for. I needed a program that could help me not only write my stories, but also have all the character information really neatly tied together. My complete world Bible, and believe me, that's become a huge Bible. And all my research information, and basically everything else I wanted to keep at hand. And I wanted a program that I could use also offline. The script for this video is something I wrote in Scrivener while I was at a location where I had no internet access at all. I find that solution in Scrivener, but don't just take my word for it. Let's look at the pros and cons of using Scrivener. Let's start with the cons, shall we? There have to be, right? It can't all be sunshine and daisies, as you may have started to think. Let's look at the first one. Working online. You can't do that with Scrivener. If you are at work, for example, and you don't have your laptop or your computer with you, you can only take some notes and later copy them into Scrivener. Another downside is that if you want to include an Excel document or any spreadsheet, it becomes a linked document instead of being incorporated into Scrivener. If you want Scrivener on your mobile phone, you'll need an extra license. Last but not least, the costs. A one-time fee of 70 euros without discounts, that might be a steep price for many authors. Now, let's look at the pros. One major benefit for me is I can keep everything about my whole series in one program. And I will tell you all about that later on. One major benefit of Scrivener for me is the fact that it has no limits on words. Have you ever reached the limit of Google Docs, for example? A friend of mine had, and she reached 500,000 words. I have also read about people who had reached the limit of 1.2 million words, I think. It all depends on how many characters you use, apparently. And perhaps also if you pay for storage, that's debatable. Anyways, she had to split her document in multiple pieces. There's no need to do that in Scrivener. Another huge benefit of Scrivener is there are no huge document sizes. If you decide to paste photos, images, maps of your world, models, anything into Word documents, your file very quickly becomes quite large. You won't have that problem in Scrivener. There's no need to switch between programs. Have you ever had to switch between Word, Explorer, GIMP, Photoshop, any other program you use to make your world and to have an overview of it all? With Scrivener, that's not necessary anymore. You can all load it into Scrivener itself. A huge benefit for me is the fact that I can work offline. Have you ever been in a place without an internet connection with the result that you couldn't open your project anymore? I've had that happening during a write-in. I can tell you that's not easy. With Scrivener, you will not have that problem anymore. Easy compiling to export for future querying and publishing. You decide how it looks, and you export it, and after that you can, if you want, do a little editing and then send it on its way. Another benefit of Scrivener is that you can import all kinds of files like images, PDFs, but also web pages. We all know how important it is to have good backups of your projects. And Scrivener gives you the possibility to set up your backup location so that your projects will be automatically backed up. Nothing better than that. Split windows for easy referencing. Now, depending on your preferences, you might want to work with a dark theme or a light theme. Preferably, I use a dark theme in all my programs because it's much easier on the eyes. And luckily, Scrivener has a few default themes, and you can also create your own custom theme. In my case, I just use the default dark theme, but you can do whatever you want. Now, I know I said this at the cons as well, but the costs can also be a very good point of Scrivener. If you participate in NaNoWriMo, by default you will get a 20% discount coupon. And if you make it to the 50,000 words, you will get a 50% discount. So that's a steal. And I have to admit, otherwise, I think a one-time fee of $70, 70 euros, my apologies, is also a very good price for a program like this. It's, like I said, it's only one time that you pay the price instead of a subscription for every month, years on end. And to top that price, there's also a trial of 30 days. And that's not consecutive days. No, that's 30 actually used days. So if you decide to use Scrivener once a month, you can go on for 30 months. That's 2.5 years, give or take. So you have loads of time to try it out. And if you have used it for 30 days, well, I think you can very easily tell if this is a program for you. For me, all the pros definitely outweigh the cons. Now that you know how I worked before and why I choose Scrivener, it's time to dive into Scrivener itself. Scrivener in itself is a very nice writing tool, but it's also a great organizational tool. I have a slightly chaotic mind when it comes to creative things, especially writing, world building, and game design. I found that if I don't organize my projects in a handy way, it will become an entire mess. Well, you did see the earlier notebook mess, I guess. Scrivener really helped me greatly in creating a good organization, and I'm happy to share it with you guys. I decided to make different sections for myself, 6 to be exact. Not all parts need to be filled from the beginning or even at the end of a project, but I found it very handy to have this division. And I would say use these sections the way you see fit for your project. Let's look at each section individually. The first section is plotting. This is essentially the major vision of your story. First, we have the outline and the timeline. These are two vital but different things. In the outline, you state what events happen in your story, where your characters are, and what they are going through. The timeline tells you when exactly things happen and the time that is between these events. Ideally, you include here where each character or creature or item is at a certain time, and that way you can see if the character or items or creatures can even be there. Because, that's quite essential. You can keep track of such a timeline in Excel, Google Sheets, any spreadsheet, or whatever, or you can use a program like Aeon Timeline. I use Excel for myself. I find that pretty easy to do. Next, we have the logline, summaries, and the blurbs. A logline is a 1 or 2 sentence summary of your book's plot. The summary is a 1 or 2 paragraph summary of your book that you might use in querying later on. And last but not least, the blurb is a summary that you will see on the back of your book or on the inside of your book cover. While your story develops, you might want to write new loglines or summaries or blurbs. Never throw away the old ones, because you never know when it might turn in to be handy. The third part is inspiration and comparable projects. For inspiration, for example, you can list books, games, movies, but also authors whose writing style you really like. Comparable projects are the books you can really compare your own book to. Themes is the fourth part in this section. You can have an overall theme for your book and smaller themes for your chapter or a section of your book. It is wise to have one overall theme for your book to keep it all on track. Icons and symbols make up the fifth part of this section. What symbol represents your book? And what does it mean? And what icon is important in your book? Include that and all the respective information in this section. As a sixth part, there's brainstorming. It's very well possible all these things, might not even occur in your world or in your story. But it can help you develop your characters, your story, and your world. The seventh part is quite important, but authors might forget it in the checklist. Foreshadowing. Why is it important to keep track of foreshadowing, I hear you ask? Well, if you keep track of it, you can make sure later on that events that happen later on in your book are properly foreshadowed, and you can check if all the information is included and if an event that transpires later on, if it's actually properly foreshadowed. For foreshadowing, I make explicit notes, stating for myself what to foreshadow, which characters are involved in the foreshadowing, where in the story the foreshadowing should take place, and where in the story the foreshadowing should have effect. All this information helps me to keep track of things I need to keep an eye out for in the book, and things I need to check later on once the book is finished. Part 8 is the permissions part. If you use the name of a real shop, for example, because it's such a wonderful name, then it might be handy to have the explicit consent of the shop owner to use that name in your book. And this is the place where you keep track of that. Last but not least is part 9, the templates. Here you can include templates for your world building, your character information, and all the other things that for which templates might come in handy. With that major vision done, Let's now take a look at the next section in your project, character profiles. Characters are a very vital part of your book. I mean, without them, there's essentially no book. So for me, it was important to have all the character information in my projects, including photos I might use and all other things I might use as reference. And I needed a complete overview of all my characters. That is where Scrivener's corkboard comes in very handy. Character profiles is divided into 4 parts, and each has its own division again. The character listing is an important, or rather linked, Excel sheet to keep track of all my characters, including additional key information like where the character first appeared and what the role of the character is in just a few keywords. The division between the different types of characters is also in this sheet. And I also have a complete overview of the total amount of characters. And my cast is racking up the amount pretty quickly, I can say. The next part in this section is character information. I have all the main characters, including important sentient beings like the dragons, in my sheets for Tagenet Chronicle. In the character listing, I have divided the characters in this corkboard into several parts. The heroes, the antagonists, the major supporting characters, the minor supporting characters, world building extras, you never know when they come in handy, deities, gods, goddesses, or whatever they are called in your world, and additional extras. You never know when you are asked to remove a character, and these might be handy to be removed at some point. Each character gets the character sheet, which is essentially an overview of the character, a character interview, if I want to do that, the character arc, which is handy to keep track of in your story, costume and clothing ideas which are specifically for that character, and any additional information I find I might need, like reference photos, some artwork you might have made yourself, all kinds of things like that. Another part in this in the character profiles is the general costume information. General costume information is basically the information of clothing, accessories, etc., that are used generally by lots of people in your world. And you might recognize, or your characters rather, might recognize the jewelry that's being worn, or a hat, or a certain type of shoes, for example, which is specific to, I don't know, people who live in the north or in the mountains or perhaps in a tropical area. So those are all things that you can keep in this part of the section. The last part of this section is possible names. It's always handy to have a list of possible names at hand for extra characters, places, countries, etc. To be able to use in the future. If you happen to include a new character on the fly, for example, you don't need to think about a name. You'll just pick a name from the list. And that way you can just move along writing, and later on you can see if that name is fitting or if you need to choose another name. Now that we have covered character profiles, let's move on to the next section in your project, research. Research is something that can come in very handy. You might want to know how certain tools function, for example, so that you can check when your character uses that tool, if your character actually uses that tool correctly. Or maybe he or she uses the tool intentionally wrong. You might also want to check, for example, how the layout of a castle could be. Those are all things that you can do in research. Depending on how detailed exactly you want your world building to be, it can be enough to just have that information in your research section. But it can also be very handy to have it transformed from your research part to your world building section, at which we will look later on. When I was writing a few days ago, for example, I found that I needed to know the name of a certain room in a castle. With a lot of thanks to my moderator and community member Dida, and community admin Dida, I have now referenced a link to the website where I found that information in my research section. And later on I'll probably use it in my world building section as well, because I might just make a new layout for the castle in Dragon City. Several of the things that you discover with your research might come in very handy with world building, like the example I just gave you about the layout of the castle. And for that, the next section is very handy. The World Bible. The World Bible holds all the information about your world. Not your characters' profiles and your storyline, because we covered that in the other sections, but information about the continents, kingdoms, places, history, cultures, and much, much more. That all has its place in your World Bible. Because my mind can work a bit chaotic sometimes, I do like to keep all the information of my world a bit organized. Let me show you how I do that. In my World Bible section, I cover anything and everything that makes up my world. It's not only about a kingdom or a city, but there is much more that makes up your world. The kingdom has relationships with other kingdoms. The same goes for cities and many other things. That is why I have divided this section into several parts. Things that are at play or can be at play anywhere in the world go in the top level, like creatures, plants, continents, cultures, etc. From there, I can zoom in on one continent, for example, Naytuan in Tegane Chronicles, and dive deeper into that continent. This is where especially the kingdoms, cities, villages, etc. come into play. Zooming in on from Tegane, the highest level, to Naytuan, we can see Naytuan has Dragon City, for example, as one of the city-states. For Dragon City, I have collected photos that serve as inspiration for how Dragon City can look. I have made a short description of the city, and this is also the place where I keep track of things like relationships between other kingdoms. I mean, Dragon City doesn't stand on its own. And cities surrounding Dragon City, important buildings like the castle, important families and other buildings, areas like the Ares and the lower places, but also the economy, which might be specific for Dragon City. If there are specific cultural things or other concepts that are also in the world section, but that work different in a kingdom or in a city, this is the place where I keep that information. Think, for example, about a desert city that might use water in trade instead of coins, because in a desert, water is far more valuable to the inhabitants than those coins. In the top level part, I will make a note in a respective part for the economy and the culture that city X has additional or different cultural information. Now that the World Bible has been set up, let's look at another important section, the publishing section. Publishing your book is most often the goal of an author. Be it self-published or published by one of the big publishers, most authors want their books to be read by others. That is why this section is good to include from the beginning, because there are a lot of things you can include here that are very helpful very, very early on in the process. It is actually important, but might be overlooked sometimes. In this section, I include information about sparring and critique partners, alpha readers, beta readers, sensitivity readers, agents, and publishers. They all are a vital part of the process, and it is good to make a start with lists of them as soon as possible. Sparring and critique partners, alpha and beta readers, and sensitivity readers are important during the development of your book. And there's no time like the present to start networking and searching for people who might be able to help you in this part of the program, for now and in the future. Having a sparring partner early on in my process is something I found extremely helpful. I was lucky enough to find some wonderful friends through the National Novel Writing Month write-ins and the Camp Cabin, who have helped me enormously with their questions and comments about concepts, storyline elements, and creatures I came up with, for example. Mind you, you don't need to include all their comments. After all, it is your book. But a fresh perspective can help you pinpoint any problem areas that you might need to look at and solve. Of course, someone might point out something because it is how they would write it, or how they would solve their story. So keep in mind that adjustments that you make based on their comments need to fit in your story. This is also, in my opinion, the place to keep a blacklist. Now, why would I do that, I hear you ask? A blacklist is so harsh. It is. You're absolutely right about that. But in the world of books, it is needed. There are publishers out there who will abuse your work, your effort and intention. There are agents out there who will want to make your book into the damsel of distress book while you have a strong female character book. And there are readers, agents, publishers who will plagiarize your work and you will not see a penny of it. And there's one other thing we need to talk about. Artificial intelligence, or AI for short. This is a whole different ballgame, and it will have its effect on the publishing industry for years to come. Make note of which sites are known for scraping the contents of your sites, of putting books into their AI systems without the permission of the book's author. This all has its influence on the sales of your books. One example of such a site that forms a risk is actually Dropbox. As you can see in this tweet, Dropbox now automatically gives OpenAI access to your content. You need to opt out of it so that your content can't be used. So keep that in mind if you decide to store your story information and your story as a whole on Dropbox. A very good source for information about these kinds of agents and publishers is Writer Beware and Victoria Strauss's social media accounts. I have linked both the website and the social media accounts in the description below. The reader's part is something you might experience yourself. If you send a part of your story, for example, to someone with the very explicit request not to send it to anyone else, and despite your request they do send it to someone else, this might be a reason for you not to send any more parts of your story to this person. Sure, they can read the book once it's finished and available in the bookstores, for payment of course. On the bright side, this section can of course also contain the information about agents and publishers you would want to work with in the future. No time like the present to start gathering that information. Of course, agents' wish list might change and publishers' requirements might change, but creating that list and filling it along the way makes the querying process later on much easier. I know this wasn't the easiest section, but now we're getting to the most amazing part of your project, your manuscript, which sits in section 6. The division of a manuscript is all about your own preferences. I will show you how I do it for my fantasy series. Yes, I'm talking about a series, and I keep it all in one Scrivener project. Feel free though to adjust it to your own needs and preferences. I'm writing a high fantasy series, and I know myself. I have the tendency to look back at my previous written works in the series, if the need so arises. And I do not want to open several projects, so I have the entire series in one project. My manuscript section is divided per book I have planned, or think I will have in the end, and deleted parts. Each book I have planned is then divided into drafts, and with that, each draft is divided into chapters. You can even go further and divide the chapters into scenes, if that is your preference of writing. If you have just one scene or chapter you're not quite sure about, you can make snapshots, as you see here, and possibly revert to earlier written parts if you find the newly edited version doesn't quite work for you. Turning on revision mode gives the changed and edited text a different color and gives strike through for deleted text. This can be very handy to use in combination with snapshots. I find it especially handy to work with several drafts for my book. Draft 0 is what I call the sandbox version. This is the version where I essentially just throw in all the characters and events and not pay enormous attention to plot and character development, world building details and all the other things. Draft 1 is where I really start to look at the story. Does the story flow? Do I need to do things differently? Are there glaring errors in the story? These are the things I fix in this draft. The second draft is the world building version 1. Now, you might wonder why I do that at this point. Let me explain. Now that you have written your story once and adjusted it once, you will have noticed world building errors. Wasn't that village supposed to be south of Dragon City? But how can it be if Dragon City is the most southern city on an H1 continent? I made an error here. But that's not the only thing. This is the version where you also check if your world feels as intended. Can the scenes and chapters you have written take place in our modern world while you intended to write a high fantasy story without industrialization and a medieval feeling? That means you did something wrong with your world building. Have you written a story that plays in a real city here on Earth, in our modern day present Earth? Are the travel times from one side of the city to the other correct? Can those buildings be there? Is a particular shop there, or is there a reason why it isn't where it is supposed to be? This is the moment to fix things like that. In draft 3, I start to look at the timeline. Can the characters, the items, the creatures, and basically everything else actually be where they are supposed to be? The timeline from section 1 should be very helpful with that. Fix the glaring errors. Fix all timeline errors you see. See how things continue to work and go from there. Draft 4 is where things really start to form a whole. Your job now is to take a good look at your characters. How is their development? Is it like you had in mind? Are they flat characters? But is that even a problem in your story, or doesn't it really matter if they are flat? Have you made sure you've been consistent with the appearance of your characters? After all, readers will notice it if your character starts out with brown eyes and ends up with blue eyes. The 5th draft is the world building version. Now that your story has all come together and your characters are also correct, make sure your world building details are also correct. This is your last check for that. Your readers will notice if you've handed out half-pint mugs in a tavern in chapter 3 of book 1 and you start handing out porcelain cups in that same tavern in chapter 2 of book 3. Make sure it's logical, or we'll have a Game of Thrones issue at our hands with a styrofoam cup in a medieval world. I mean, that doesn't fly, right? If a mage in your book has moved a mountain, that's one very powerful mage, by the way. In chapter 10, make sure that mountain is still in its new place in the last chapter of your book, unless it's been moved back, of course. Now, depending on how good I feel about my draft, I might already send out a part of my draft 0 to my sparring partner. But otherwise, I would just wait until I have at least draft 1, the story flow, finished. Oftentimes, I find that there are quite a few changes between draft 0 and draft 1. I will give you an example from Tagenei Chronicles. It's not a good one. I found that I needed to completely rewrite my draft 0 after I had written myself into a horrible corner, where no matter the amount of paint, I really couldn't paint myself a way out anymore. Now remember, if you decided to delete a part of your chapter or even a whole chapter, keep that in the deleted parts folder of your manuscript. You might never know if you can still use it in the future after some heavy adjustments, or perhaps you can use it as inspiration or a base for a future story. It might also be that these deleted parts are more a background story for your character that is not needed in your story. In that case, just move it to the respective character profile. And of course, world building pieces that are not needed can be moved to the respective world building part. It's always handy to keep information you've written. With all of these sections now covered, I'd like to give you a few bonus things about Scrivener. Scrivener has several tools that are ideal when you are writing a story. They really can help make your writing life a bit easier. For example, the name generator. If you are stuck and looking for a name, try this name generator. Who knows what you may find? Another tool I find extremely helpful is dictionary and lookup and search. Do you want to know if the word you've written indeed has the meaning you intended to have it? Use the dictionary function. or use any of the lookup functions. Especially if you want to make sure the word you made up isn't actually a real world that doesn't fit your story at all. To keep track of your project, Scrivener also has a variety of tools that are more related to the text details, like the project targets, word count for a session, which I find extremely helpful, and the word count of your total project, but also writing history, in which Scrivener keeps track of how many days you've been writing, how much words you average on a writing day, and things like project statistics, where you can see how many characters you've used, how many words, but also how many times you have used a certain word. You may have noticed that besides Scrivener itself, I also use one other program, Excel. I find it quite easy to have a spreadsheet linked in Scrivener so that I can keep track of things like foreshadowing, characters, etc., etc. Like I've shown earlier. Are there any tools you use besides Scrivener or in combination with Scrivener? Let me know in the comments. I wish you a lot of fun with Scrivener. I would love to hear about your experiences with Scrivener and any questions you might have about the program. Post them in the comments below or join me in one of the live streams that I have every Friday, and I will respond to your questions as soon as possible. Now, I don't want to let you go with just everything about Scrivener. I have a writing prompt for you. With everything now covered, here's a writing prompt for a short story. Your character is an author. How does she keep her projects organized? What tools does she use, if she uses any? And why does she use these tools? Let me know in the comments. If you'd like to start writing in Scrivener and ask your questions live, be sure to like and subscribe to my channel to be notified of my upcoming weekly live streams. I do writing sessions every Friday. Check all the live stream sessions out in this playlist.